Shadows of the Reactor. A horror story from Chernobyl. Prologue. Before the explosion. Before the word Chernobyl became a symbol of catastrophe, fear, and abandoned cities, it was a place of hope. In the north of Ukraine, among dense forests and quiet rivers, stood a young city called Pripyat. It had been built for the workers of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The city was new, bright, alive. Children laughed in the streets. Young families walked through the parks. Movies played in the local theatre, and music filled the town square in the evenings. Everyone believed nuclear power was the future. The Chernobyl plant was one of the largest in the Soviet Union. 4 massive reactors produced electricity for millions of people. Engineers, physicists, and scientists all worked here, trying to control the power of the atom. But the atom is a force that can never be fully controlled. And one April night in 1986, something went terribly wrong. Chapter 1. The Night of the Experiment. April 25th, 1986. An experiment was scheduled on Reactor No. 4. It was supposed to be routine, a test to see how the turbine would behave during a power failure. For most of the workers at the plant, it was just another night shift. Lights glowed in the control room. Hundreds of instruments blinked across the panels. Engineers watched the readings carefully. "Power is dropping," one operator said. "Good. Continue the procedure," the senior engineer replied. No one knew that this experiment would change history. The reactor's power level began to fall. Too quickly. Operators tried to stabilize the system, but the reactor was already behaving strangely. Readings jumped. Sensors gave conflicting signals. "Something's wrong," a young engineer whispered. The room fell silent, as if the entire plant were holding its breath. Chapter 2. 1:23 a.m. The clock read 1:23 a.m. That was the moment everything changed. First came a strange sound, as if something deep beneath the building had shifted. Then, a violent shock. The concrete walls trembled, the lights flickered, and a second later, the explosion came. The reactor's massive lid, weighing thousands of tons, was thrown into the air. Flames burst outward. Blocks of radioactive graphite scattered across the plant grounds. A column of radioactive smoke rose into the night sky, and the workers still didn't understand what had happened. "Is the reactor intact?" one operator asked. "That's impossible. Reactors can't explode," another replied. But when the firefighters climbed onto the roof, they saw hell. The reactor had been torn apart. Chapter 3. After the disaster, in the first hours, no one understood the scale of the tragedy. Firefighters climbed onto the roof to extinguish the flames. They didn't know that pieces of radioactive graphite lay all around them. Many received fatal doses of radiation. Hospitals in Pripyat quickly filled with patients. People complained of nausea, dizziness, and strange burns on their skin. But the true horror began later, when scientists realized the reactor had been completely destroyed, and that radiation was slowly spreading across the city. Chapter 4. Evacuation. April 27th. Residents of Pripyat were told to take their documents and essential belongings. They were promised they would return in a few days. Buses stood in long columns along the streets. People left their homes. Toys remained in children's rooms. Food still sat on kitchen tables. The city became empty, but not everyone left. Some people stayed behind. Among them were scientists sent to study the damaged reactor. They were the first to notice that something strange was beginning to happen inside the zone. Chapter 5. The first strange signals. Several weeks after the explosion, a group of researchers worked in a laboratory near the plant. They were measuring radiation levels. But one evening, one of their instruments began behaving strangely. The dosimeter showed sudden spikes, as if a moving source of radiation was nearby. "That's impossible," one of the scientists said. "No one was supposed to be in the zone." And then, a sound echoed through the dark corridor of the laboratory. Footsteps, slow, dragging, as if someone were walking, pulling their feet across the floor. But when they turned on the lights, the hallway was empty. Chapter 6. A signal from the darkness. The laboratory stood at the edge of the zone, an old concrete building quickly converted into a research facility after the disaster. 3 scientists were working inside, Dr. Sergei Melnik, biologist Irina Savchuk, and a young physicist, Oleg Kravchenko. Outside the windows there was an unnatural silence. The forest surrounding Pripyat felt wrong. No birds were singing, and there were almost no animals. Only the wind sometimes moved through the empty apartment blocks. Oleg stared at the dosimeter screen. "It's spiking again," he said quietly. Sergei stepped closer. "How high?" 10 times normal, and it's moving." Irina frowned. "What do you mean moving?" Oleg turned the monitor toward them. A map of the laboratory appeared on the screen, and a small red dot. It was slowly moving down the hallway. The three of them fell silent. "There's no one in the building," Irina whispered. And then something slammed in the corridor. Chapter 7. The cameras. Sergei slowly turned to the security monitor. The laboratory had a few old surveillance cameras. He turned on the first one, an empty hallway, lights flickering. The second camera, a storage room, nothing. The third camera, the staircase, and then the image jerked, as if something had just passed in front of the lens. "Did you see that?" Oleg whispered. Sergei rewound the recording. Frame, another, and then they saw it. A dark figure, very tall and unnaturally thin. It passed the camera in less than a second. "Is that a person?" Irina asked. Sergei didn't answer, because even in the blurred frame, its arms were far too long. Chapter 8. The forest. The next day they decided to search the area. They put on protective suits and took their dosimeters. A grey mist hung above the power plant. The wind rattled rusted warning signs. Oleg walked in front. His dosimeter began to crackle softly. "Radiation levels are rising," he said. They entered the forest. Suddenly Irina stopped. "Do you hear that?" Everyone froze. Something was moving deep in the woods. Branches slowly pushed aside, as if a large creature were passing between the trees, but they couldn't see it, only movement and the snapping of branches. Oleg raised his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness between the pines, and for a second they saw a silhouette. It stood between the trees, taller than a man, and its eyes glowed with a faint green light. Chapter 9. What remained in the reactor. That night, Sergei studied old documents. After the explosion, several scientific teams had tried to investigate the reactor. Some of them disappeared, without explanation. The reports contained strange notes. Unknown biological mutations. Animal behavior drastically altered. Movement detected inside Reactor 4. A cold shiver ran down Sergei's spine. Then he found the last entry from one of the missing scientists. Just a single sentence. "Radiation doesn't only kill, sometimes it changes things." Chapter 10. The Visitor in the Night. Around 3 in the morning, Oleg woke up. He thought he heard someone walking through the laboratory. Slow footsteps. He got out of bed. The corridor was dark. Only a red emergency light glowed above the door. And then he saw it, a shadow on the wall, moving. But the corridor was empty. The footsteps came closer. Oleg slowly turned his head. At the far end of the hallway, a tall figure stood in the darkness, completely still, as if it were watching him. And then it took a step, and the dosimeter on his belt began screaming with radiation. Chapter 11. The Thing Watching from the Dark. The figure stood at the end of the corridor. Oleg couldn't move. The dosimeter on his belt crackled so loudly the sound echoed off the concrete walls. "Ooh, who's there?" he barely managed to say. The figure didn't answer. It stood completely still. Then, slowly, it tilted its head, as if studying him. Oleg took a step back. At that exact moment, the emergency light went out. The corridor fell into complete darkness. A soft sound followed, like long fingers dragging across the concrete wall. Oleg switched on his flashlight. The beam slid down the hallway, and no one was there. Chapter 12. The Tracks. The next morning they examined the corridor. Irina noticed it first. Look, there were footprints on the floor, large, much larger than a human's, and strange, as if the foot had been deformed. Serhiy knelt down. "This isn't an animal, and not a person," Irina said quietly. The track stretched down the corridor toward the laboratory door. And then they stopped, as if the creature had simply vanished. Chapter 13. The old tunnel. Later that day, Serhiy found an old blueprint of the facility. Beneath the laboratory ran an abandoned service tunnel. It had been used during the construction of the power plant. After the disaster, it was sealed. "If something got in here," Serhiy said, "it could have come through the tunnel." Ole didn't look pleased. "You're suggesting we go down there?" Serhiy looked at him. "We need to know." Chapter 14. The descent. The tunnel entrance had been sealed with metal plates, but one of them was bent, as if it had been forced outward from the inside. They opened the door. Immediately they smelled it. A metallic odour. Bitter. The air inside felt heavy. Ole turned on his flashlight. The beam swept across a long concrete tunnel. The walls were covered with dark stains and scratches, long ones, as if something had dragged enormous claws across the concrete. Irina whispered, "That's impossible." Chapter 15. The sounds. They walked about 100 meters. Then they heard it. Somewhere ahead. Slow breathing. Deep. Heavy. The air in the tunnel suddenly felt colder. Ole felt a chill run down his spine. "Serhiy," he whispered. But Serhiy was already staring into the darkness. Something moved there. Very slowly. Then the beam of their flashlight hit the wall, and they saw a hand. Long. Unnaturally long. It disappeared around the corner of the tunnel. Chapter 16. The truth Serhiy realized it first. "It's a person," he said. Irina shook her head. "No. It used to be." Silence filled the tunnel. Radiation could cause mutations, but not like this. Ole spoke quietly. "What if it's one of the scientists? The ones who disappeared?" The silence in the tunnel grew even heavier. Chapter 17. It's coming back. Suddenly something slammed behind them. They spun around. The tunnel entrance had closed. "No," Ole whispered. Then they heard a sound. From the darkness ahead, footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Like a massive creature walking across the concrete. The breathing grew louder, and then 2 green eyes opened in the darkness. Chapter 18. What the reactor created. The creature slowly stepped into the light. It looked like a human, but only vaguely. Its body was stretched and twisted. Its skin was dark, scarred by radiation. Its arms were long, almost reaching the floor, and its eyes glowed green. "Oh my god," Irina whispered. Serhiy understood. "The reactor. What? It didn't just explode. It created something new." The creature tilted its head, and then it smiled. Chapter 19. The stare. The creature stood at the far end of the tunnel, watching them. Its eyes glowed green in the darkness. No one moved. Even the air in the tunnel seemed frozen. Ole gripped the flashlight so tightly his fingers turned white. "We need to back away slowly," Serhiy whispered. But it was already too late. The creature took a step forward. Its long arms almost touched the floor. Another step, and another. Then suddenly it hissed. The sound was so loud it echoed through the entire tunnel. "Run!" Irina shouted. Chapter 20. Escape. They ran back down the tunnel. The flashlight shook in Ole's hand. Shadows danced across the walls. Behind them came the sound. Fast footsteps. The creature was moving far quicker than it had before. Ole looked back and saw it. It was running down the tunnel. Its body moved strangely, as if its bones were too long. "It's catching up," he shouted. The exit was ahead, but the door was closed. Serhiy grabbed the metal handle and pulled desperately. "Faster!" Irina yelled. The footsteps behind them grew closer. Closer. Then suddenly the door burst open. They stumbled outside. Serhiy slammed it shut. A second later something slammed violently against the metal from the other side. The door shuddered. Chapter 21. The decision. They stood in silence. All three were breathing heavily. "It can't get out," Serhiy said. "If it does..." Irina didn't finish the sentence. Ole looked at the blueprint of the facility. "The tunnel leads to Reactor 4. Serhiy nodded slowly. "Then that's where it came from." "You're saying..." Irina began. "We have to go back. Are you insane?" Serhiy looked at them calmly. "If radiation created this, there could be more of them." Silence filled the room. Irina finally exhaled. "Then we stop it." Chapter 22. Reactor 4. The next day they approached the ruins of Reactor No. 4. Broken structures surrounded them, bent metal beams, concrete debris, and the massive sarcophagus covering the destroyed reactor. Their dosimeters crackled constantly. "The radiation here is insane," Ole said. The entrance to the old service corridors was half buried under rubble. They climbed inside. It was dark and very quiet. But after a few minutes, they heard something. Breathing. More than one. Chapter 23. The nest. The flashlight beam swept across a massive chamber, and they froze. Strange shapes lay across the floor. At first they thought they were debris. Then one of them moved. Irina whispered, "There are many of them." At least 10 creatures were lying in the darkness. Long arms, damaged skin, glowing green eyes. They were gathered around a massive black mass. Serhiy understood immediately. It was what remained of the reactor, melted nuclear fuel radiation. The creatures slowly turned their heads and looked at the humans. Chapter 24, the final plan. "If we destroy that mass," Serhiy whispered, "they'll die." "How?" Ole asked. Serhiy pointed at the demolition charges they had brought. "One charge. But then, yes, someone would have to stay behind." Silence filled the chamber. Irina looked at him. "No." Serhiy smiled faintly. "I'm the senior one here." He took the detonator. "Go." Chapter 25. The explosion Ole and Irina ran through the corridors. Behind them they heard the creatures hissing. Minutes later they finally reached the outside. Irina turned back. In the distance stood the ruined power plant, and then an explosion. The ground shook. Part of the old reactor structure collapsed. Then everything went silent. Epilogue. Several months passed. The zone was closed again. Officially, due to dangerous radiation levels. Sometimes Ole watched the old security recordings from the laboratory. One file was strange. No one had noticed it before. It was recorded 2 days after the explosion. The camera showed the dark forest, and between the trees, something moved. A tall figure, long arms, green eyes. Ole turned off the recording and realized one terrible thing. Serhiy destroyed the nest, but not all of them.